Hey, Sapha, thank you so much for being here today. We're so grateful that we get to interview you. I would love if you could introduce yourself.
Hi there, my name is Sapha Burnell. I am a Canadian cyberpunk and mythpunk author and poet who focuses on cerebral and emotionally grounded works. A true dash punk, I challenge norms and intertwine queerness and faith to envision a world on the brink of dystopia that we can usurp and heal. An outcast who writes strange fiction, I play with super soldiers, superior AI, and literal mythological gods in the cyberpunk Lieben cycle and my mythpunk novel series, The Judge of Mystics Saga. The first two books are currently out right now. Actually, by the time this airs, all four books of The Judge of Mystics Saga will be out. We're going to be talking about those today. I'm really excited about it. My focus on more critical work as a literary theorist is in the ethics of artificial intelligence, transhumanism, and the philosophy of the divine. I continue to research world mythologies while writing about fiction, and I stream live critiques and writer's education on Twitch twice a week. That's every Tuesday and Thursday. You can find me everywhere on social media at Usurper Kings.
I would love if you could jump in and tell us what your books are about.
All right. So my Judge of Mystic series are my current series that I'm releasing. They are a series of mythpunk novels surrounding protagonist Caleb Malthison, the titular judge of the Mystic Realms. And the Mystic Realms keep a tenuous peace after centuries of war. Forged into the realm's only judge, demigod Caleb Malthison is both peacemaker and executioner of the mystic truths. And the first book one, Char and Ash, starts off with when Caleb is called to the charred remains of a sacred grove outside Dover. Numerous rumors reignite tensions as Ares warns of wars, whispers. High Queen Celica is hiding something in the roots and petals of her Fey court, and it smells of Char and Ash. Char and Ash is an emotional and captivating mythpunk slash godpunk supernatural fantasy and the first novel in the mythic Judge of Mystic Saga. After that one, there is the brand new released as of August 31st, Son of Abel. And Son of Abel is the next novel. It happens 2 days after Char and Ash and starts off with Caleb Malthison wanting out. He wants out of the truce. He wants to be gone, and it shakes the entire truce to their core. The entire cosmos hiccups around Finnegan the Fae. Mystic Judge Caleb Malthison desperately clings to the journals of a 7th century Catholic cardinal obsessed with a magical tattoo that threatens to crumble the mythic realms to wrath and war, a place they know and fear too well. Spiraling with only his scheming ex, Delilah, to quote unquote help, Caleb searches for the elusive way out of the truce as he descends through the essence of grief in layers of hell on earth. Finnegan breaks his exile to find Caleb's absentee father, Raynar, to wrench Caleb loose before his absence strips the realms of their judge and protector. And before Delilah weaves Caleb into plans of her own, and wrath shatters through the last roots of the world tree. And then book three, Book of Revels, starts off a couple days after the events of Son of Abel, with Caleb basically getting conned into picking up Delilah's delinquent teenage daughter from the boarding school that she got expelled from. And it reconnects us with the villains that we see in Char and Ash. We finally get the comeuppance of Stana, the main villain of Char and Ash that we do not get to see in Son of Abel. And it is the beginning of the uptick. Son of Abel is the valley. It's the lowest point for Caleb. And then we go forward up through the valley. I always like to make sure that if I'm going to bring my readers into a valley in the first place, into a place of emotional catharsis or into a place of, in this case, grief, that kind of thing, that I'm going to lead you out of it again. I'm never going to leave you there. If a story has left you there, it's not the end of the story. So, Book of Revels is the uptick. It is starting the upswing. Caleb discovers a new sense of family. He starts to reconnect with everyone that was important to his life and with some new people who are becoming important in his life. And he finally gets retribution against what Stana did. And no spoilers, I'm not going to tell you what that was in Char and Ash. And we're finishing off with Ginnungagap, a wonderful world of word of Scandinavian origin. It's basically that sort of gap, that chaos before the worlds got started. And this is where Caleb and his small little close-knit family reconnect with their larger family, the Aesir, aka the Norse gods. And so we finally get to see Thor in all his glory, and we get to see Odin, and we get to see family coming together again by the end of this Judge of Mystics saga, which is the end of this saga, not the end of the universe. We are also doing a radio show. I guess you should call it an audio drama nowadays. Oh, got to get up with times there. Called Waxwing, which is being produced for early 2024.
Amazing. What inspired you to write your books?
Two things. I love mythology. Ever since I was a kid, one of the first gifts I ever got from my dad was this dog-eared copy of classical stories, basically Hellene myth that in the back had this wonderful like Veterans Affairs card in it. So it was from his time in the military. And I fell in love with myth. I fell in love with folklore, both as a way to connect to my, kind of cultural representations, being somebody that I was never educated by my family in a lot of this folklore that was part of our lives, but it was the way that I could connect to, my Scandinavian side and my Slavic side and, several different kinds of myth that you could really grip and hold on to. So ever since I was a child, I've always loved myth and mythology. And I went to university for comparative religious studies in the background of English literature, which basically means that I studied a lot of folklore, a lot of mythology and everything in there too, and how myth can change culture and how myth can give you some societal nods. So that was the first part. I knew that my world building was going to be very inclusive of as many global mythologies as possible. And then the other part of it really was a rediscovery of family. When families are disconnected and when, whether through divorce or through other means, we might not have a connection with one side or another of our family, that inevitably leaves a bit of a void. And in some cases, that's like, yes, thank you. That's what I need, and that's okay. That's totally like whatever you need to do, you do. But that idea of finding either found family or, genetic family and reconnecting and really going from a place of loneliness and going from that place of disconnect into the Innengard, as they call it in Norse mythology, into the inner place, into that place of safety and connection where society and order can be maintained. That was really important to me. So Caleb goes through much of the journey that I think, in a way, I wanted to, going from a place of disconnect into a place of connection. And I think that really is the backbone of the emotions of the book.
Love that. When you were writing your books, who were you thinking of when it comes to who your books are for?
Somebody a little bit rebellious, somebody who's okay with subversion, a little bit of rebellion and subversion. I write what's called mythpunk. This series is called mythpunk, and that was a term that was coined by Catherine and Valente. And it's basically taking folklore and myth and adding elements of postmodern fantasy techniques. So a little bit more of on the urban fantasy, on nonlinear storytelling, on, surrealism and world building and that kind of thing. And so for me, I do write in a nonlinear fashion. A lot of the times I'm mixing up the timelines. I'm not necessarily starting at the beginning, middle, and end. And I'm using folklore in a bit more of a rebellious lens. So anybody who likes a little bit of rebellion, anyone who likes folklore, anyone who likes adventure, there is pugilism in my books. I myself am a lifelong martial artist. And so for me to write in fight scenes and combat was just naturally part of the way that I tell stories. So somebody who loves adventure and also somebody who wants to engage emotionally in the characters. More than anything, my books and the feedback I get from them as well is that be prepared for an emotional ride. Be prepared to laugh, to have those moments of laughter and fun, and to have those moments where you're like, "Oh my gosh, I feel this, like, sense of dread," and then happiness and sadness, and, be prepared to feel emotionally for these very visceral, authentic personalities, and be prepared to go through a journey, a bit of catharsis. Be prepared to go maybe into some somewhat scary places, or some slightly more, grief-laden places and things like that, but we're not staying there. We're gonna stop off, we're gonna have that moment, and then we're gonna go move on, and I like to mix that balance of tension and humor. So, it's somebody who's probably listens to a little bit of metal, potentially, somebody who is a fan of, William Gibson, Neil Gaiman, a little bit of Margaret Atwood in there, somebody who can engage in things like, on the TV, Lucifer, Supernatural, magic realism in all its glory. So that's who I wrote it for. The adventurers, the people who want to feel, and the people who also want a story that makes them laugh and makes them go, "Huh, I never thought about that."
Love that. How long have you been writing and what made you really sit down and start?
So we actually do have poetry that I wrote when I was 3. In my older brother's little notebook with the A, B, C that you're supposed to trace out the letters, I was so obsessed with being better than him at anything I get my hands on, that I took his book, I filled all of it out, and then I started making my own little poems in the margins. And we actually still have these, today. So there's not a time period I remember in my life that I have not been writing in some way, shape, or form. As a professional, my first book was my poetry collection, Usurper Kings, which is where I get my social media name. And Usurper Kings was out in 2014, but my first publications were even earlier than that, around 2009, and going forward. So professionally, as a member of the Writers Union of Canada, and then also just as somebody who has been developing manuscripts for not only literature but film, treatments and screenplays, s 24 years. Oh, since I was very young. Let's say that and not admit to how old I am. Uh,
What is your schedule like when you are writing a book?
I do lots of sprints, so I'll put a timer on. Sometimes the Pomodoros, other times I'll just put on the sprint and then completely forget about it until I'm like, "Oh, yay, I've been on a break for 20 minutes. Wow." You know, uh, I basically, once I get going, I will make myself that tea or coffee, or, pour myself a glass of wine, depending on the time of day. I'll set myself up on my desk, and of course, my desk needs to be completely cleaned off of any non-essential things. And so my desk is completely clean, my office is tidy, I don't have anything to kind of distract myself with, and I'll have that tea, that coffee, that fika, the coffee and the snacks, um, and then I'll the first 20 minutes or so, I'll be like, "La, la, la, okay, here's a word, here's the word there." I'm reading back what I read the previous day, or, working what I'm working on. And then once I get down to it, my head goes down, and sometimes I can write for hours and not look up unless I'm being bothered by somebody. So I have a few friends, especially on Discord, they're like, I'm chiming you right now. You need to look up for air. When's the last time you rose from your desk chair and stretched?" You know? So when I get going, I can write around 4 to 5,000 words an hour. Um, so it's but it takes a little to get there, but that's usually my schedule. I'll write for a few hours a day, depending. I also have other employment as well. I'm an editor for a small press. So when I'm able to carve out my own writing time, usually it's like, I have an hour and a half. Go! Write as much as possible. Ah! And I've got some music playing, it's probably in my cans if my dog's around, because I don't want to put on something like Flesh God Apocalypse with my poor rescue dog being like, "Oh." But yeah, so usually when I get to my writing, instead of helping develop other people's manuscripts and helping to develop the small press, then it's probably nighttime or really early morning, either before or after the working hours. and it's a mad dash to do as much as I can.
Amazing. So amazing. What do you need in your writing space to help you stay focused?
My clean desk, a fika, like a coffee in a sec. I know that word fika is it's Swedish, you know, but and music, and to not be bothered.
Love it. What is your favorite writing snack or drink?
Coffee, coffee is number one, and like little biscuits or caramel, like cinnamon bun or like a little sweet treat to go with the coffee. Or depending on the time of day or night or what scene I'm writing, a glass of red wine and some olives. They are fantastic and wonderful. So it really depends. If it's the morning and things like that, I'm getting ready. I'm kind of having my fika will be my breakfast and that kind of thing. It's definitely coffee and some form of pastry treat. Later on, though, where's the Malbec? Where's the Carmenere? Let's crack it open. Where's some olives? Where's some just nice little things to kind of nibble on? Those are my two favorites. So.
Love that. What type of books do you personally enjoy reading?
I love the work of les absurdistes, like Camus, especially, I'll read him in French, but when it comes to English language, I love cyberpunk. Give me anything by William Gibson, give me, again, the Neil Gaimans as well. I really like the work of N.K. Jemisin, which is fantastic, fantastic author. I tend to read a lot of nonfiction. It's because I spend so much time editing fiction and working on my own fiction that it's very hard to turn that off. So I try and read a novel I haven't read before, and before I realize that there's a red pen in my hand, I'm like, "No!" And I have to put that down, and I have to like, "Oh, shoot, no, never mind. Oh, ooh." And I it's difficult, I know I have a really good book in my hands when that editor turns off and I'm able to just read. And then I'm like, "Oh, wow, this author needs to be praised to the highest mountain." Like, oh, wow. I totally shut down my author and I was just able, it's my inner author, and I was able to focus on the book. I read a lot of poetry. I read a lot of books on, comparative mythology, a lot of books on the history of different religions and archaeological finds. I do a lot of reading on transhumanism and AI and quantum computing, so physics and things like that. And that has more to do with the fact that the Judge of Mystics Saga is my mythpunk series. It's my mythology bread and butter. I am writing a cyberpunk series where I'm working on more of a hard sci-fi kind of angle to the science, which is, it did end up stalling me on Lieben a little bit because, I started writing it 10 years before it was published. And 8 years in, all of a sudden, the technology that I had been writing about how this is going to happen in the future, this is going to be brand new in the 2080s was like, oh, it's here. Great. Okay, so this is 60-year-old technology by the time of all right, well, I'm gonna be going back and rewriting this, like, "Oh, okay, never mind." So I do a lot of my reading it as research.
Love that. Are there any books or authors that inspired you to become a writer?
The books of Madeleine L'Engle, and I was actually very privileged to have my prof in university, my creative writing professor, she actually knew Madeline. And, she was there for a lot of Madeleine's, different workshops and, so I come from a literary tradition where we were very, very overtly and directly tied to the works of Madeleine L'Engle, to her theories on creation and the act of creating, especially with books like Walking on Water. And so I have to say Madeline, obviously it's not my contract, but it might as well be, thank you, Madeline, you helped. And I think too, just going into what she actually put science-wise into, the Wrinkle of Time Quintet and things, and just seeing that as a kid and being like, oh, whoa, hey, yeah, hey, this is really cool. I think that has such value, and it has such tonal value too to the way that I write. William Gibson is another gigantic one. There was a teacher that I had in grade 12 English who, at the end of the year, and of course he was leaving to go to another school. So this was his last English 12 session. It was in the summer, and a bunch of us who had just finished English 11 were like, oh, he's leaving by September. So this is our last chance to get him for English 12. Let's do a summer school course. And so we did a summer school course, keeners, this wasn't like we had failed. No, we were keeners. We were like, we want to do it now. And so he's like, yeah, let's do it. And so we were reading Bertrand Russell and Philip K. Dick. We were watching Amadeus and AI Artificial Intelligence by Stanley Kubrick and doing deep discussions and things. And that few weeks of that summer were so formative to what I ended up becoming. And by the end of it, he handed me this dog-eared, yellowed copy, this mass market paperback copy of William Gibson's Count Zero, the third book of the Sprawl trilogy, which starts off with Neuromancer and then Mona Lisa Overdrive and Count Zero. And he's like, I think you're going to dig it. And it exploded my world. Like, I went from being somebody who had already, by the time that time of my teenage years, was already performing in theater. I was already, doing Shakespearean recitations and things like that. I thought, oh, I'm definitely going into Shakespeare and the classics. And all of a sudden, here's this incredible mind-bending cyberpunk book, and it completely shattered what I was going to do the rest of my life. So, William Gibson, definitely shout out to him, absolutely changed my life. I remember reading an interview where he's like, "Yeah, if anybody asked me what the plot of Count Zero was, I probably wouldn't even remember because that was 20 years ago." I'm like, "Oh." But that's the way it goes. I think other than that, the, journals of Hildegard von Bingen were a big one that encouraged me to have that strong female voice. And strange as it is, probably a lot of people say this, but C.S. Lewis, not for the Chronicles of Narnia, but for Till We Have Faces. His book of the retelling of the myth of Psyche and Eros from the perspective of Psyche's sister that was left behind. And Till We Have Faces is an incredible work of, mythological retelling, and going through that, and then it just, yeah, it absolutely made me go, hey, you know what, I can take all of these stories that I know like the back of my hand, all these different versions of originally oral tales. I can make something of that. I can do this too, and I can do it from my voice instead of his.
Love that. What books did you grow up reading? Did you have an all-time favorite?
C.S. Lewis was my all-time favorite as a kid. Uh, Not at the least because I actually grew up in quite a traditional Christian home. So, Christian private school, Christian private everything, we were very cloistered. I know now how cloistered I was, and times have changed. Times have very much changed. Uh, you know, Going from being in a place where I didn't even have a word for queer, and now I'm like, hey there, my hair is purple, blue, and pink. You wonder what flag that is. Going from there. So there was a lot of education after that. But growing up, it was the works of C.S. Lewis. It was the Chronicles of Narnia. It was Madeleine L'Engle. There were these two books that I've completely forgotten the author. They were these books of Christian children's science fiction. One of them was with this, teenage girl who ends up discovering she has the power of basically telepathy. She has the power to hear people's thoughts and to hear all of this certain kind of thing from beyond a planet, from one planet to another. And becomes this huge adventure where she's going off and communication is difficult. You can't do it unless you have somebody with her power. And I don't even remember the title. I don't remember the author, but those images that I got from that book were incredible. I think my all-time favorite of the books that I read growing up, though, unless you count Zero, which was when I was 17, but earlier than that would have to be The Last Battle by C.S. Lewis, because it took a kid that was so terrified of, the very fundamentalist Pentecostal people around me who were like, "Oh, the Lord's coming soon. The rapture's coming. You're not even going to reach your high school years before the world explodes." Taking that kind of thing as a kid and internalizing that fear, and all of a sudden, here's this book where it's all gonna be okay. No, no, no. That fear doesn't mean anything. That fear doesn't belong here. Only the love belongs here. And the battle, and, the battle's really cool because, "Yay, battle," you know, let's grab our swords and go, you know, um, but it really did break some of that, some of the suckage growing up. Uh,
Love that. On the other side of that, now as an adult, what are your favorite series or authors that if they come out with something, you automatically grab it?
Gibson, absolutely Gibson, the work of Lucas Drobnik. He is the author of Vostok and Nocturne. He usually does flash fiction, but he wrote this piece of, almost cyberpunk spy versus spy, incredible novel called Vostok. It's so poetic. It's just gorgeous. Like the prose is incredible. It's about these club kids in Poland who are in the middle of all these murder investigations and things like that, and it's just fascinating and wonderful and luscious, and I love it. So that's Lucas Drobnik with Vostok. I think also the work of Sasha Rosell. She is an Italian feminist author who writes fantasy. And her first English language book, My Heart is the Tempest, and full disclosure, I got to work on this book. Like I got to put my hands on it. So this one is totally a shout out to Sasha Rosell. She just, oh my gosh, the prose. It is a blend of poetry and prose in motion, and it is just gorgeous dark fantasy. Absolutely gorgeous. 12-year-old girl coming into herself, fantasy land. It's epic. My Heart is the Tempest is so good. So everything that she does, I'm like, I am following. Mainstream wise, I don't have a lot of series where I'm usually grabbing them. I'm more looking around the nonfiction books. So Carol S. Pearson, whenever she puts something out like Persephone Rising or The Hero Within, that kind of thing, I'm grabbing her books. So nonfiction wise, usually it's more that kind of thing. Michio Kaku, give me more of your books. Come on, let's go. Come on, Michio. Come on, let's go.
Love it. What would you tell someone just starting out with reading again?
Have fun. Start with something you enjoy and find books that how controversial do we want to go here? Um, find books that are not dark for darkness' sake. I think it's very easy for us to write a work where we are diving into the incredible depths of the negative parts or the shadow parts of the human being. And there's some amazing, beautiful literature being written in that vein. I'm not saying that that stuff's not important, but if you're starting to read again, I think as a reader, you need to be very conscious of what this book is going to make you feel by the end of it. And are you ready for that? You can be, and maybe you need that, and that's great. But make sure you liven it up a little too, not necessarily that everyone has to have Hollywood endings in their books. It's not what I'm saying. But for all of those pieces of darkness and tragedy and those motifs that really kind of drag into the shadow, try and find something that also brings in some light. Is when you find that balance between humor and tension, when you find that balance between, you know, fear and joy, you're going to find something that's going to stay and rest and be part of your mind for the rest of your life, you know. And then I mean there are books that you read because they need to be read, but if you're just starting to read again, find those places where you can enjoy. I mean, Terry Pratchett. I mean, Good Omens is always a good one. Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett together. That book is hilarious. It's about the end of the world. It's about the apocalypse. By rights, I should be terrified of that book. I freaking love it. And the two series, the two series TV shows, fantastic. Um, but find those things that you can just both relax in, and yet at the same time also have those little bits where you're like, oh, What's that? Oh my goodness, this book made me cry. It made you cry, but I also made sure that you got to laugh at the fact that Zeus is living in an old folks' home wearing adult diapers all day long. So,
Love it. On the other side of that, what would you tell someone just starting to write their own book?
I think
I
it
think
kind
it
of
kind of
corresponds
corresponds
with
with
what I said
what I said.
about people just starting to read again. I think the number one thing that you need to consider is the difference between a writer and an author. So, as a writer, write whatever you want. Write the most authentic thing you can. Write all of it down. Write, 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 write. You can't go wrong. Just write everything in your head. Write it all. Being an author is a commercial profession. Now you're taking that writing and you're seeing what parts of it you're going to put out there for the general public or for a smaller group of the public to consume. So there is a separation between being an author and being a writer. Everyone can be a writer. Some of the best writing I've ever read in my life are people who are like, oh, I'm never going to publish. I just want to write. And they're just putting their stuff up on a website, and it's just absolutely the best stuff I've ever read. So, first, look at your story. Is this something that you are writing for commercial success or profit? Or is this something that you are writing for yourself because you have to tell the story? And then from there, certain things are going to change. The way that you approach certain storytelling techniques is going to change depending on one or the other, because unfortunately, we have what's called a market and a marketplace. And as authors, we need to make sure that we are placing ourselves within those spaces as judiciously as we can, because otherwise our voices are going to get lost in the wonderful and incredible literary ocean that's around us. This world is so full of such amazing stories that we are having to try and climb to the highest mountain in order to be heard. And so when you're writing, write the most authentic story you can. Your first draft, do it all. Go for it. Just throw that spaghetti on the wall, throw that Pollock paint on the canvas, write 20 pages describing an apple. Go for it. Once you get to the second draft, that's where you're going to have to kind of decide where things go, whether or not that, 19 pages of that content about that description of an apple belong in a bunch of other books of yours, or whether they belong as their own thing, or whether they just need to go in the bin. That doesn't mean that that writing was useless. It means that you're developing yourself and your voice. And then also find your voice. Find your voice. It is the intersection between your own personal way of doing things and the grammar that is necessary for the person reading your book to understand. So once you find that intersection, you're golden. Don't try and copy somebody else. You're not somebody else. People can tell how inauthentic that is. You're you. Write your story. And then prepare yourself for how you need or want to edit it in order for that story to best be recognized by others.
Amazing. Love that so much. What is one thing that people are generally surprised to find out about you?
I am an internationally awarded martial artist. I taught and ran a martial arts academy for almost 7 years in Taekwondo, and then I was taken out by injury, you know? Yeah, it's often kind of strange to see, this this woman wearing a bunch of makeup and this, that, and the other thing, and pink walls in my office, and I am a consummate martial artist. I love martial arts, even though I'm not professionally a martial artist anymore. I I do love it. I think the other thing that they would be like, huh? I'm actually a classically trained vocalist. So not only did I do martial arts, but I also sang opera. Um, so it's sort of like the whiplash is real. You know? What? Well, what else did you do? Well, a few things. Yeah, I think that's
L-
probably the biggest.
Love that. Is there anything you would like to say or add?
I would love to tell people that if they've liked what I've said so far, you're going to incredibly enjoy the Judge of Mystics saga. I'm very excited about it. This is a few years in coming. The original stories that the Judge of Mystics saga were based on were published in 2012 and then 2017. So I'm very excited. I'm very excited to have the saga of Caleb Matheson written and actually getting out there. You know, if you like strong characters, if you like the fact that, Ares is there, Aphrodite is there, Thor is there, Izanami is there, Amaterasu and other figures of mythology are all present. Is there a Baba Yaga? Well, there's some other Slavic folklore there. Baba Yaga comes in a different thing. But if you like that sort of mixture between mythology and current contemporary adventure, a bunch of Char and Ash and the other books happens in and around Vancouver, BC, Canada, and other locations on our very own planet, on our very own world. So it is that mixture of humanity and magic. And I'm just I really wish people would read it, obviously. I mean, come on. If it's the whole film industry thing, well, if you can't tell people what's good about your work, why would people want to see it? Well, I think these books are neat. You know, I I really liked writing them. I enjoyed the catharsis of going through Caleb's emotions as, in Char and Ash, he and his lover, Tuya Dragonova, who very much in the audiobooks that we're recording right now, I'm being like, okay, how did Oma say it? Okay, Oma, she said like this. So I have to use the accent that she used. And I'm like, oh, I got to remember. So, calling my uncle the other day, being like, remember when Oma would, yes, and we're both like, whoa, 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 into the microphones together, like, yeah, trying to get that authentic voice. Um, she's this badass Slavic warrior, and Caleb and her base well, a small spoiler for the book, they end up getting married in Char Ash, after 10 years of a relationship. So, it's been a long time coming. And just navigating between all of these vicious evil forces, Stana, who wants to kill the gods, and Cormac of the Willow, this dark evil fae who wants to reignite the mystic war because he believes all the mammals, and that's what he calls, people who are not sentient plants like him, all the mammals need to be controlled. So you've got these deep forces, this sense of battle looming, and these senses that if you take two steps too far, all of a sudden the whole thing's going to unravel. So I think they're really neat. Char and Ash is just a fantastically fun read that I had. Son of Abel goes into a bit more emotions. It definitely goes into the cycle of grief, but we come out the other side and we start to heal. And then once we get into Book of Revels and Ganungagap, that healing continues. And we finally get to see both of the main villains in Book of Revels. That's Stana getting her comeuppance. In Ganungagap, it's Cormac getting his comeuppance. And then I actually, just after the feedback that we got from the first two books being out, my publisher, the small press, they were like, "Yeah, so, Tuya, so she needs her own book, right?" And so I'm like, a fifth book for the quartet. Well, that's a yes. Okay, let's do it. And so we are in talks to write Psychopomp, which will be a Tuya specific novel, the biggest badass in the entirety of the realms, Tuya Dragonova. She's going to be fantastic, and her own book is going to tie into the other ones, and then it will conclude at the same time as Ginnungagap. So I'm very excited by it all. Please read those books. If you want to know where to find me, if you can join me on Twitch again every Tuesday and Thursday, you can find out more information on that and everywhere else I am, either on any social media platform you're on, X, Instagram, Threads, on Substack, all of the aboves. Blue Sky as well. Blue Sky. I'm also on Blue Sky at Usurper Kings, aka the name of my first book, Usurper Kings. Also on Twitch at Usurper Kings. And my website is saphaburnell.com. That is SAPHABURNELL.com. saphaburnell.com that has more information on not only my books, but the audio drama Waxwing, which will be coming up in 2024, and that takes place in the Judge of Mystics universe as well. It takes place before the saga, and it's the story of Icarus and their brother Leander. And so we get to bring in some of Caleb, we get to bring in Icarus and Leander and Ares and Aphrodite and all those guys. And then it also has information on Coco Craze and Top Shelf, my Judge of Mystics Saga, system agnostic, tabletop role playing one shots. So these are replayable games that you can play around your kitchen table. It was actually a lot of fun when Coco Craze came out. There was a comic shop in West Virginia that had, their kind of like their kids group, things like that. They all played it, and the parents were like, "Oh, Cocoa Craze? Okay." And so they, like, made little chocolate cupcakes and little hot chocolate because the whole point of the TTRPG one shot is for you to, like, go about and solve puzzles and make the best hot chocolate in the universe, and apparently it was fantastic, but the kids were just so high on sugar, I'm like, awesome. So, all of information on all of that is at saphaburnell.com.
Amazing. Well, you covered most of this last question. Where's the best place for readers to find your books? Do you offer signed copies? Because a lot of readers love those and the best place to connect with you. But do you offer signed copies?
I do, and the only place you can get a signed copy is saphaburnell.com. So there are a few signed copies that my publisher, VredaMedia.ca, do have in stock. But if you want a signed copy and if you want a signed copy with a special message, then you just go to saphaburnell.com, and down at the bottom of the page, you'll be able to see my shop. And that has signed copies. It also has um, my art, some of my fine art and things like that for sale, and more information. If you want to read, a few chapters of my books, there's two ways that you can read them and, kind of try before you buy, quote unquote. And that is by going to usurperkings.substack.com. My Substack, and again, the links are at saphaburnell.com. My Substack has free articles every week and paid articles every week. It serializes my drafts for the Judge of Mystics Saga. And I also make sure that all of my books have the first two chapters live on Substack for free for anybody who wants to read them. So I think it's important to be able to say, hey, purchase my books, but you know what? I want the people that would enjoy them to purchase my books. So you read the first couple chapters of those books, you will very much get an indication of my emotion and my tone, and that would be an excellent way to both support me and to read further. So that would be it. Otherwise, you can always go to your local public library if you are in a place or a country where your local public libraries are present, and especially in Canada, we have what's called PLR, public lending rights. So for every book that you have in a public library in Canada, authors can get royalties from the Canadian government, from the PLR program. So it's incredibly important, depending wherever you are. If you want to read a book and you're like, you know what, I would love to, but that's 4 books, and let me look at my bank account right now, and ay. Libraries love ordering books that they know people will want to read. Going to your local public library, asking them, "Hey, I had this interview, like I read this book, or I really want to read this book. I listened to this interview. This author is amazing. Can you please bring in Sapha Burnell's collection? Can you please bring in the books of Sapha Burnell?" And a lot of the times, if they have the ability to do so, they will do that. And that's another way that you can support local authors and support your libraries too.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here today. We're so grateful we got to interview you. We'll be sure to drop all those links in the show notes. That way everyone can find you. And again, thank you so much.
And thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much for being such a wonderful place for authors to find their voice.